Daisy, your view?
Well, I can only imagine what it's like being one of the families of the bereaved, knowing that from the get-go, this government has been so focused on ripping shreds out of each other that they haven't been looking after the British public. And of course, at the start, we didn't know there was going to be a global health pandemic, but it's clear that they were all so busy throwing mud at each other and engaging in briefing wars that clearly has made a contribution to the many, many mistakes that we've seen over the last year or so.
Daisy, you're on the all-party climate group. When people hear that, they may ask themselves, what's the point here in the UK of taking further radical steps to change my life if the world's biggest polluter, China, continues to emit at the same levels?
Well, let's be honest, I don't think people are asking that question. I think people are absolutely banging at the door to want our government and every government around the world to take this climate crisis seriously. You know, we have less than, I think, 9 years now to stop irreparable damage to our planet. And we do need every single country and every single person to play their part.
But hang on, Daisy, you would accept that the government has set quite challenging targets, I think, by most people's assumptions, and they're actually and have achieved rather a lot in terms of cutting carbon emissions, certainly since 1990s levels.
Well, as you say, I'm a vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group on climate change, and we've engaged a think tank to do an independent audit of the government's announcements and across the 6 major areas that contribute to carbon emissions in this country. The UK government is scoring 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10 on most of those areas. So the government isn't going anywhere near far enough to tackle this. And in fact,
fine. But my point, and perhaps what John Kerry was saying, that does it matter if China continues to emit at that rate when people see that bigger picture, that the sort of action we'd have to take here would be so unachievable, John Kerry is saying, impossible in order to mitigate what's going on there. How do you deal with that? How do you tell people?
We simply can't throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, well, let's just go along with this. Let's just see the planet burn, can we? Every single one of us has to do something. And the more that every single person, the more that every single country can do, the more we can mitigate the scale of the crisis. But what we really need to see is leadership at home, because for the last few months, we have been fighting this Conservative government, which wanted to have a new coal mine. It scrapped grants for the green homes. It scrapped grants for electric vehicles, charging points. We need to see far more action at home, and then we need to see that leadership taken onto the global stage as well.
Matt, do you want to respond?
No party has said, vote for us, we're going to hit these targets by making your heating bills bigger and taking your car away and stopping you going abroad.
Right. Well,
and if they had, I think that people might have started to say, hang on, is this the only way to tackle climate change? What about, I mean, these technology things sound great, but...
Daisy, you're shaking your head.
There is a really big opportunity here. We mustn't see that action to tackle the climate emergency is going to make our lives worse. You know, under Liberal Democrats' proposals, we would be insulating people's homes and thereby ending fuel poverty. We would be investing in the trains so people can travel more by public transport and divert the funding that the Conservatives are putting into building, £27 million worth into the roads. There are ways in which we can create the green jobs of the future and actually stimulate new economies around the UK. There are ways in which you can tackle the climate emergency and make people's lives better and make the economy better too. There can be a win-win situation, but we need leadership at the national and the international level to be able to do that.
Right, M&S, Marks and Spencer's, to cut Christmas products in Northern Ireland because of the checks and because of the trading arrangements currently.
I mean, first of all, isn't it extraordinary that we're here in 2021, the middle of 2021, and with all the hot air about oven-ready deals and getting Brexit done, here we are still trying to figure out the details. I think what we need the UK government to stop ramping up the rhetoric. It is counterproductive to have threats of unilateral action. We need cool heads to prevail. And I think what we need for the UK to engage actively with the EU, potentially talk about the use of grace period extensions to get a long-term and sustainable solution, because all this ramping up the rhetoric does absolutely nothing for the people who are caught in the middle of the whole situation.
Right. What about the EU? Do you think it's on them as well to dial down some of the rhetoric in order to reach an agreement?
I think both sides have to engage constructively, and it is incumbent on both sides to make sure they do dial down this rhetoric. We need to have the UK and the EU working collaboratively and collectively to find a long-term permanent, sustainable solution that will work for the people of the United Kingdom. And at the moment, ramping up the rhetoric helps neither side.
Right.
There is a big distinction. And I think the problem with the government approach is that COVID ID cards, which is essentially what they are unworkable, incredibly expensive, and they are discriminatory. And I think what we've seen is that a number of people in the nighttime industry and lots of nightclubs and potentially other places, because it's not just nightclubs, it could be theatres or other places we just don't know yet, they're all saying it's so expensive and it's so unworkable. This is creating more red tape for us. Effectively, if you say that we can only open up by requiring COVID ID cards, you're effectively saying that we have to remain closed because there's actually no choice for us because they are so unworkable and divisive. So I think what the government needs to do is to come clean about whether it's safe for these places to reopen. And if they can reopen safely, then let's see the plans for how that can happen, with the government putting more investment into rapid testing and paying people to self-isolate. But at the moment, there is really no choice here for some of these businesses. They're saying it's unworkable, it's expensive, it's red tape.
Why is it unworkable? Because we've just heard Richard explain that it is working with this particular pub. I mean, there is an app that you can use and show your vaccination status. So what's unworkable about it? You may not like it, and it may be the wrong thing, but what's unworkable?
So I think one of the issues is that people are saying, well, there are probably ways in which people can get around this, and they can maybe have sort of fake passports, and that then you'll be asking people on the door to actually regulate what is and what isn't a genuine vaccine ID card. And then you have the issue of the costs, and and also having to pay people on the door, basically asking bouncers effectively to have to patrol this. And I think it creates it creates a false sense of security, because even with the vaccines, we know the vaccines have weakened the link between hospitalisation and death, but we know that even with both of your jabs, you can still catch COVID and you can still pass it on. So we need to have other measures in place. And actually, I would much rather the government put all of its time, effort and money into making sure that masks are mandatory in indoor closed spaces, invest in supporting people to self-isolate. Those are the measures that we know will work. COVID ID cards, as I say, they're problematic, unworkable and discriminatory.
All right, well, let me just... Daisy, what about you? Are your fellow MPs in there?
I'm not sure who's in Parliament today. Some MPs have been back in Parliament. Some are preferring to work from home for personal health reasons and other reasons as well. I, for one, am happy to go into the chamber. I'll be wearing my mask as long as people respect sort of social distancing, for as long as we're dealing with COVID. I think if anybody came and sat right next to me without wearing a mask, I probably would have to leave the chamber and would want to take part virtually. So for as long as there's adequate self-regulation, I'm okay with that. But I mean, we have to make sure that that is not just in the chamber, but right across the parliamentary estate.
Right.